Good morning, Mr. Hudson. How are you, sir?
Yeah, good, good. Another day in paradise, I believe.
Absolutely, and welcome all to My Life, My Music. We're calling this one Hudson 74. You make me feel brand new. Because in essence, Al, that's what happened almost 50 years ago, or it will be 50 years ago next January, when you joined Stoke City. Things were going off the rails a little bit. We covered that in Yesterday Once More, 1973. We looked at the last 12 months of your time at Chelsea. We had that situation towards Christmas when you and Oz would drop that game at Bramall Lane, Sheffield United. Chelsea won it 2-1. They thought that they could carry on with two of the greatest players ever to wear the royal blue of Chelsea. How wrong were they? Ozzy left and went to Southampton. You caught the train and joined Wad the God at Stoke City. We have covered that in my Stoke City years at Hood at 50. We've covered a lot of ground. We're going to nail down that 12-month period from when you walked in the door there at Stoke City to obviously the December the 31st in 1974. So let's begin. What was your memory? What was your thought pattern now with that iconic photograph with you and your hold all bag and you looking $1 million, 22-year-old kid jumping on the train and going to a brand new life?
Well, I think it's like anything else. If you look back on your life, you go, I wonder what was going through my mind at the time. And it was one of those situations which happens, if you can imagine what happened at Chelsea with me happened so quickly. We kind of won the two cups in my first 2 years. Then, ironically, we lost to Stoke City in the League Cup final. Then it all went pear-shaped. I had a bad problem with the injury, obviously, we recovered. But and then within the space of 48 hours, I ended up becoming a Stoke City player, which was unthinkable, because we talked about when me and Oz were sitting in the restaurant talking about what clubs would you prefer, and all the big names were coming out, and then all of a sudden the telephone didn't ring. But and it rang only one call from Mr. Waddington. So I kind of got off. Then on the Saturday night, I met Tony on the Friday night, and he said I'll meet you in the morning. And he took a bit of a chance, really, Paul, because usually he's spot on with things like that. He would have signed you straight away. I thought he might have signed me straight away, but there was no terms. We didn't even talk money, as which I think is important in my career because I played for the love of it. And then he said, "I'll see you at the bridge in the morning at 11 o'clock. We sign a contract." He was late, very late, and he'd been out in a nightclub. He said, waiting for Ozzy all night to call him back, but that didn't. I don't know about that. I had a party I went to Fleet Street that afternoon to do a deal with Sunday people about my move, why I moved, and then on the Saturday night I had a going away party. All my family and friends come round, so that's how quickly we got a party together in 24 hours. So, and then all of a sudden it was Sunday after the party, and then going down my local and then saying goodbye to friends and everybody in my local, and before I could blink, I was jumping off the train, about an hour and 40 minutes in them days at Stoke Station. So I was in a blur, really. Everything was a bit of a blur, and met by Tony Waddington, who you can tell by the photograph, he had a big beam on his face. He was delighted with the player he'd signed. He obviously knew more than what I did because I was having a nightmare at the time, playing-wise. I had a bad injury. I lost my confidence. I was just going lost my wife. I don't know if that was such a bad thing, though. So I'd kind of lost everything. I was broken. I was, and if had that move to Stoke had gone wrong, I could have been on very close to the scrap heap, And I went to see my father on the Saturday night, as I told Tony I would. I said I got to speak to my dad about the move, and he said I would think he would go and speak to your father about it, but he did. Not knowing my dad and the influence he had on me, Tony didn't know at that time. And my dad said to me, this could be the best thing ever happened to you. And my dad was right again. So, yeah, and then I walked out the Stoke station. I looked at Josiah Wedgwood and wondered who he was. I should have had a statue of Tony Waddington there,
Yeah.
really, not Josiah Wedgwood. And then I see a big yellow Mercedes, and I thought he's going to surprise me by giving me this as a signing on present. and it and it belonged to Jeff Hurst, who I didn't even know was playing for Stoke. So all at once, it was like a hour and a half movie, 2 hour movie, all wrapped into 2 minutes, where so much had happened so quickly. And the press conference was about four people.
Yeah.
So that was what that was like in them days, really, and that's what our show is all about, really.
Absolutely. And I think that really ties into the first track that you've picked, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. I'm just going to read a couple of lyrics. I've took out one of the words, so sorry, Alton, but it still rings so true. It could almost have been written for you, Al. I listened to my old man. You know you can't hold me forever. I didn't sign up with you. I'm not a present for your friends to open. This boy's too young to be singing the blues. So goodbye, Yellow Brick Road, where the dogs of society howl. And then he goes on to say, I finally found where my future lies, beyond the Yellow Brick Road. That really is very apt for what you've just described. And Alton could have almost written that, although Alton wrote the music, it was Bernie that wrote the lyrics. So apt for your time, and even more so apt that you arrived in a yellow Mercedes beyond that
Well,
Yellow
yeah.
Brick Road.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I really didn't need that Bernie Taupin for that one. I could have wrote it myself. But that's fantastic. You picked that out, Paul, because I didn't realise. I know the words to it, but
Yeah,
and I've sung it a million times in different places, in parties and pubs and clubs, and gone along with Reggie and sang it, and. Yeah, I mean, it is so apt. It is so apt, and it makes you wonder about life. Sometimes certain things that happen and write songs or whatever they are, or you see a movie and a little bit of deja vu comes up, and you think, "Have I been there before?" Uh, them words kind of they were written for me. I must agree. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think all the songs that you've picked for this episode, Al, that one was from 1973, hung over from 73 to 74. So nicely links from Yesterday Once More onto Hudson 74. You make me feel brand new. A track that you've picked, and Waddington did make you feel brand new. But before we get into another record, there was 22 number ones that year, and you have picked one of the number ones. It got to number one in the October of 1974. But just to throw a little bit of light on some of the things that happened that year, the IRA bombing began on mainland Britain. Nixon becomes the first US president to resign after the Watergate scandal. The miners' strike brought down the Tory government. Rumble in the Jungle happened, and Stephen King, a young 26-year-old author, had his first novel, Carrie, published. There was a lot going on, and we are going to just dip into one or two things that happened that year. The season started quite well for Stoke City. This is the 73-74 season. They won the Watneys Cup, but by January they'd fallen to 17th in the first division. It really went from a cup in 72 at Wembley. Okay, the Watneys Cup wasn't a particularly big cup, but it was a cup designed for all the top scorers in the respective leagues, and Stoke beat Hull City 2-0 to win the Watneys Cup. But they really, really were falling off the rails, and it was Alan Hudson signing for Stoke that really made the difference. In fact, since well, after your signing at Stoke, they lost just two games from the final 23. You had a better record than probably Liverpool and Leeds United that ran out winners. And we're going to dip into some of the games shortly, Al, that you played in that 12 months. The first being Liverpool, and it was one of your final games for Chelsea against Liverpool, and your first game against Liverpool at the Victoria Ground. So let's start at that. You've put your boots on, you're walking out, your home debut. What was going through your mind?
Um, Before you go any further, talking about what happened in 1974, you forgot to mention that Seattle Sounders were formed in
Absolutely. I
1974,
was going to go on
and
to that.
when you mentioned the record, which is I'm quite proud of because it was yeah, it was not only big for me and gave me back everything. As I said, you make me feel brand new is very apt as well. Uh, it was a great. It was a. My story is better than most stories because um, I know I'm no different from anyone else. But maybe in some ways I am, but I'm a great family man.
Yeah,
And from the day one at Liverpool game, it was quite strange because when I went in to see the manager before the game, it was so different in a million ways, Paul, for me leaving Chelsea and going to Stoke because at Chelsea it was much more regimental at Chelsea and I suppose at most football clubs and I found again at Arsenal they did it when I left Stoke. You know this. I'm a great believer in playing the game as it comes, playing off the cuff. You know, I love the Maverick theme. Um, I don't believe in, you know, being here at 12 o'clock and being there at 12:30 and there at 1 o'clock before football matches. I think football matches should be the way that, like when we were at school or in the playground or just playing an ordinary football match. I got to Stoke and I couldn't believe that we had to be at the ground, you know, between 2 and 2:15 for a 3 o'clock kickoff.
yeah.
Now, I wondered at Chelsea, you had to be at the hotel at 12 o'clock. So you're rushing around in the morning, you know, and people that lived we were very lucky in them days that we were all British or many Londoners, you know, Ozzy from Windsor, a couple of lads come from Battersea, I come from Chelsea. You know, the furthest away was probably Eddie McCready from Stirling, Tommy Baldwin from Gateshead, you know, but basically they all lived within probably a 45 minutes to get into the grounds. So, or to the hotel. So that's 11 o'clock. You got to, up at 10, you got to leave home to have lunch. Just to have lunch, which was nothing really. Uh, so you got to get up early and all that rushing around. But when I arrived at Stoke, I remember getting up and thinking, this is great, you know.
Mm.
Uh, no rushing around. I've got to, you know, I can sort everything out, speak to who I want to speak to on the phone. And my family got in there and the first thing Tony said, you know, was he didn't give me no team talk or what he wanted, nothing. He was a man of very few words. He just trusted you, you know. And when I asked him for 22 tickets for my family and friends, he kind of, you know, thought, "Oh, this is good." But he loved that with me, and that was why he was such a lot of managers would have said, "You're no different from anyone else. You will get the four like everybody else." But Tony was a great believer in um, bringing more outsiders into the club. The more people come from London, the better. He used to love the press. As many press people come to London. He was a great PR man, and He always loved to put Stoke City out there, you know, on the map, and you know, and he saw that as a good thing, and he welcomed my family and friends, you know, and he was not just my family and friends, but all people that come to the ground. So that was a big thing for me, and as I say, it just it flew by. The first thing I can remember when putting my boots on was I wonder who's going to pass to me and who's not going to pass to me, because those in the dressing room were kind of looking me up and down, and two or three players wasn't sure. Uh, I suppose coming from Stoke-on-Trent, our back four were all local lads. We didn't have Gordon Banks in goal. Obviously, he'd done his eye the year before in that tragic accident. Um, so I was wondering, I was more worried about my team than Liverpool, to tell the truth, because I know all about Liverpool, and I knew I had to play a lot better than what I did to them against them, a couple of weeks before. And I just thought to myself, whatever you do, just go out and don't try and do anything to impress the crowd. I was even watching football yesterday, and I was watched about four games yesterday. I was thinking back to my days at Stoke, and the reason I done so well at Stoke and hit it off with the crowd, because I done things so simple.
Yeah.
And I started the game simple, and I thought, don't try and pass the ball over 10, 15 yards. Just make sure you just don't give it away. And I don't mean with I could say that in a pub, and they say, well, you said you don't like people just passing the ball. But say, I don't mean passing it square and backwards. I mean just knocking it to people square on them, then getting it in front of them, and then all of a sudden I opened my game up, and then I could tell that we were in the game, and I could feel my form coming back a little bit, and I just kind of hit it off with Jimmy Greenoff immediately, and I just see him as my way out of this, Everything I hit into him stuck, and I just got it back off him. He was a great player to play with. So he helped me a lot in them days. We had left back Mick Paget, who wouldn't pass to me. We had a right back, Jackie Marsh, couldn't pass to me because because his eyesight. We had a right half, John Mahoney, who was a tiger of a player, Welsh international, tremendous player to have alongside you. But he was more involved in his game and getting on with the way he plays it. So he wasn't not like playing at Wembley with Alan Ball. You knew exactly what you do. You just think, well, him and have the ball all night. But this wasn't the case, So it was like it was half a trial game where you don't know anyone in the team and you're wondering if they're going to pass you or not, So it was. I was absolutely delighted that the way things went, and the crowd seemed to think, because what I went into the game knowing, but as the years have gone by, even more so now, I think it would have been absolute tragedy if I'd have played like I did against them in the blue shirt, and they'd have beat us 3 or 4-0, and Waddington would have been absolutely lambasted. He would have been slaughtered in the newspapers for paying a record fee for a playboy coming from London who was out of form, and I would have been. I remember sometime later, Steve Daly signed for £1 million for Manchester City from Wolves, and Steve come over to play with me in Seattle, and he was a good lad, but £1 million player he wasn't. I would have been called the biggest flop in football, really, had it all gone wrong. And Tony Waddington we would have been put against the wall and shot, really, in the Porries. I wouldn't, instead of being going out sat on that Saturday night and everybody all over you, because it was a great start, I wouldn't have been able to go out on that Saturday night. I'd have had to go home and lock all my doors and, put the bars up the windows, because it would have been a disaster. So that's the way I looked at the game. But as regards the game itself, Stan Cullis says that it was the best debut he'd ever seen. It wasn't a fantastic debut. It was more of a relief for me to get through that first 90 minutes without playing like I had it been playing at Chelsea for the last 3 months.
Absolutely. And instead of Alan Hudson walks on water, they'd have probably put a couple of bricks and thrown you in the Trent, wouldn't they? But that's the fine margins of winning, losing, and being able to swim. And you did swim, Al. You did reference the transfer record. It was a British transfer record. We'd had the Martin Peters that went from West Ham to Tottenham. We'd had Alan Ball that went from Everton to Arsenal. We'd had David Nish going from Leicester to Derby. Then Alan Hudson, £240,000, broke the British transfer record in January 1974. And it wasn't until Valentine's Day that Bob Latchford broke it, 350,000. Again, a part swap with the player Howard Kendall and Archie Styles. But you were the record British transfer signing back in 1974. Another first in 1974, Al, was your second game. You played Chelsea. Now, I know you won, and Jeff Hurst scored the winning goal from the penalty spot, but that was the first game ever to be played on a Sunday. What's your memories of that?
Yeah. I mean, that couldn't have been better, because once again, if the previous Saturday had gone, the wrong way, and I'd have had a nightmare and gone into the Chelsea game, I'd have still been in, a bad frame of mind, really. But it went so well against Liverpool that I couldn't wait to play in that game, and I was there. I had some great friends at Chelsea, and still have. I love, I love seeing the boys from that team, and although there's only about half a dozen left, two or three of them are great friends. I love get with them when I can, but I put one over. I've got the picture. I've got where I'm sitting in my flat now. I'm sitting in a photo with. Shaking hands with John Hollins. John Hollins was captain of Chelsea that day, and I was captain for the day at Stoke. And there's the referee standing there. I must send you this photo over, Paul.
Yeah.
It's and there's the referee doing his Elvis impression. He's got an Elvis Presley haircut, and you can't believe it, And I know what I'm saying to Johnny Hollins. I know, actually, 50 years on, I know what I'm saying to Johnny Hollins. I know what Johnny Hollins is saying to me, because I knew John since I was 13 years of age, and I just told him that I was going to run him ragged, and he kind of laughed, and he laughed, he kind of laughed and said, you always won for the one-liners, Al. I said, well, it's not going to be a one-liner today, and that's what I did. That was really a great performance, far better than the Liverpool one, and to finish it off, I got the penalty as well. So I knew how I got the penalty. The young lad Gary Locke was right back, terrific right back, but I knew I had him, and I got the ball just inside the Chelsea box. I played a 1-2, and Gary kind of, it says almost as if we looked each other in the eyes, and I just knocked it by him, towed it by him, and I knew he had long legs, Gary, and I thought he's going to bring me down here. And it wasn't a case of today where players dive. He was going to bring me down, and he had no other way. I knew he couldn't get the ball, and over I went, and Hursty smashed the penalty. That was a great start to beat Chelsea and look over. I wasn't happy to beat my mates, but I looked over at the bench at Dave Sexton, and and kind of smiled, a right smile. I was delighted to beat them.
Was there any thought in your head that you wanted to take that penalty?
No. I knew how good Jeff was at taking them, and I'd done my bit. I got the penalty. I think if he'd have thrown me the ball, I'd have been delighted to take it, and because I knew, obviously, I knew all the. I was lucky. I was lucky at Chelsea when I got into the team because I knew all of them because I'd been there for a couple of years as a schoolboy, and I know the good, the bad, and the ugly at this stage of who they were when I got into the team and who I could trust, who could trust me, and that was a good thing about when I got into that team. But when I left, and I also knew who wanted me to stay and who wanted me to go. So I was in a good position especially with having the manager that trusted me more than anybody.
Absolutely. And when we roll it forward to the 27th of April 1974, you then went back to Chelsea and you did score that day again in a 1-0 win. And really, that was the game and that was the goal that put Stoke City into Europe. When you signed for Stoke City, they'd actually just dropped after a draw at Ipswich into the bottom three. An unbelievable turnaround. Chelsea, they must have absolutely loved the return of Alan Hudson.
Well, it was. I think it was the same day that Dennis Law scored.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
Mm.
uh, which I didn't realise at that time, which I didn't really care about at that time, in all fairness. But because we played Manchester United on the Monday night, we were going back to Stoke that night, and the last thing I can remember about that game, I remember. I think we had a corner, and I was on the edge of the box, and unlike today where you see about eight players come out to try and block it. Watching Everton yesterday, you'd have had all these players trying to charge the ball down. They come out to me I was on the D there, and I just half volleyed it, a good strike, and we went 1-0 up, and that was a dream, and it couldn't be no better. Uh, and then I remember getting on the train, and I couldn't wait to get out of London, which was strange because you might have thought that I would have wanted to stay down, but I didn't. I really didn't want to stay. I didn't want to be around Chelsea supporters because I was to learn that they give my family a bad time all around, and they absolutely slaughtered me through the game, which I didn't hear. I wasn't aware of. But my family told me that they were disgraceful, what the names they were calling me, which was unbelievable, really, because, as you know, we spoke about that Osgood and I didn't want to leave, I suppose it's some, I got this case with the FA going on, and, you got to tell the truth, they I never asked for a transfer, and they wanted to get rid of me. They wanted to pay for the stand, and these are all the little things that gave me so much delight to, because if they'd have got away with it, if I'd have played no good in those first few games, and Chelsea would have thought, oh, didn't we do well getting all that money for him? We told you he was gone, But we turned it all around, and that's the song, You Make Me Feel Brand New. And I was brand new by that time. I was a different person in 10 days, since meeting Waddington. I was a different person, and I was back in love with the game.
There's a phenomenal line, and again, it could be written about you and Tony in that wonderful track, You Make Me Feel Brand New by the Stylistics. And it says, Only you came when I needed a friend, believed in me through thick and thin. This song is for you, filled with gratitude and love. Again, that's something else that you could have penned for Tony, because he did make you love again, didn't he?
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. It's uncanny how since you and I have known each other
Mm.
and been talking about football and music, how they go hand in glove, and words and all that. And it's like I'm sure it's a little bit different. Like a man and a woman have fallen in love and everything else, but there's songs written that remind people of how they met and everything else. But this really does fit the bill, And if you were to write a song, that would be it, and that would be my song for Tony. Although I had a lot of songs for Tony, I got to say, especially when he had a Gordon's and tonic, and his favourite little tipple. No, it was like going it. I don't know. I know I drive people mad talking about Waddington, but I don't care because he was that much in my life, you know, and he kind of, and I sometimes have to look up the photos on my wall and apologise to my father that I speak about him more than I do my dad, but that was the way it was, and that was what the great impact he had on my life. You know, and the day my father first met Tony and shook his hand, my dad didn't shake people's hands. He didn't do all that.
And you can catch the full episode at www.patreon.com.